you.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Classical Republican. This is part 2 of my interview with Dylan Johns, host of Nature and the Nation podcast. So we're still
Hello.
talking about liberty, and I want to know what your thoughts are on how we preserve liberty.
You know, so much of what we do in this country is dependent on the people's mindset, and a country that doesn't value liberty is not going to preserve liberty, especially when it's a country that's very much based on principles of democracy. If the majority of people don't care about liberty, there's not a lot that can be done without really like tweaking the mechanisms of government. And I think that a lot of what people who believe in a different leftists, let's say, people who believe in a different vision for what our country is and could be and should be, have made a lot of their progress not through mechanisms of government, but through getting their hands on the levers of power, of people's the opinion making apparatus. So media and educational institutions and things like that. So if we want to preserve liberty in this country, if we value liberty, we have to make sure that we are spreading the message of liberty and why it's important to people through means, through educational institutions, through media institutions, through technology, through just the general sense of where people stand on the issue. So, if people are filling up human resources departments in large corporations or medium-sized corporations, and those people really don't value liberty, then it's even going to come through in the policies of the company. You're not going to be allowed to, wear this shirt, or they're going to be looking at what you say on your social media account or what have you. There's just not going to be a general. I mean, you've got like to use the example of free speech, you've got the First Amendment, and then you've got free speech as a principle. And there's a lot of times when the First Amendment itself might not be violated by something, but the principle of freedom of speech is. Like when a private company tells its employees what they can and can't say on social media. Well, that's not a violation of the First Amendment, no, but it's a violation of the principle of free speech. And if people don't value free speech as an important part of their society, then it's once an idea has run through society, it's only a small jump from there to get the legal system to support it. But what a lot of problems that a lot of conservatives face with regards to issues of free speech and many others is that very often they'll say, well, like, let's call it drag shows at the library, book drag queen book time at the library or whatever. Like, a lot of conservatives think this is a travesty. We need to get this, we need to nip this in the bud by making these sorts of things illegal. And it's just, I find it a little interesting that the side of the political equation that tends to be skeptical of state power pretty quickly will go to some sort of governmental solution to various problems that they find. Well, we've got to get people elected into office who are going to put a stop to this. And it's not really a good long-term solution to try to resolve an issue through the mechanism of government when the people themselves aren't capable of resolving it on their own through their decision-making processes. The culture, politics is downstream from culture, I think. So preserving liberty is something that's going to come down to how people talk about it, and going to come down to what sort of, and it's not just a communication question either. It's a question of um, of power. You know, if you like a lot of conservatives will sometimes, you know, kind of tease about, well, you know, we don't have time to go protest in the streets because we're all working. We're the side of the equation that has jobs and we have families to feed and we got to go to work in the morning and we can't be, and that's fair. But I feel like progressives in this country have a lot of power, and they didn't get that power by not working. You know, if to the extent that major corporations are all lining up with the progressive agenda, that's the result of a lot of hard work on the part of progressives getting themselves into positions of power to push their agenda. So, any kind of conservative agenda, whether it's liberty or anything else, depends on getting people into positions of power and pushing for that agenda. And then getting stuff enacted into law is the last step, not the first.
Okay. That's really interesting. So I want to ask you, locally here in Idaho, we had an issue in the Republican Party where they had a resolution and they were talking about, I believe it was vaccine mandates at the hospital. So the hospital wanted and the hospital is a private organization, and they wanted to have, but which actually gets a lot of state funding, but that wasn't really factored into the thinking. But it was one side of the Republican Party was arguing that, um, who are we to tell our government to punish private corporations for having a vaccine mandate? That's up to them. That's the private entity. And then the other side was saying that it's a threat to the community. So and the workers. So where would you fall on that debate?
Um, I am not vaccinated, and I'm really opposed to vaccine mandates across the board. I think they're um, just, in general, a real imposition on people. I think there are shades of how destructive such a thing is. Um, in a hospital setting, I guess I feel like of all of the most egregious mandates that could exist, a mandate in a hospital is not the most egregious. Um, if the people who manage the hospital feel like that's in the best interests of the hospital, I don't think it's a particularly good idea. I mean, I think natural immunity is, studies have shown, and I think it makes sense, natural immunity is every bit as good as the vaccine. Um, but I guess I feel like, you know, you have to choose your battles, and a vaccine mandate in a hospital would not be at the top of my list of things that, you know, in a company that is not a healthcare setting where you're not dealing with people with compromised immune systems, or, you know, sick people or old people who are more, you know, at risk. It becomes more egregious. If it's a factory, if it's a retailer, if it's a supermarket, you know, it becomes more egregious. And when it's coming from the state, then it's even more egregious, you know. But for a hospital, I guess I feel like I would oppose such a thing, but I wouldn't. I don't think I would oppose it vigorously.
Okay, thank you. So my next question is, how do you view class? So is it even a thing? Is it a thing in the United States? And should it be factored into our political analysis?
Uh, yeah, it is a thing, maybe more than we would like for it to be. Um, I don't. I think that, you know, I generally believe in the principle of meritocracy, so that, you know, a person can rise up through the rungs of the social ladder through hard work and, you know, being good at whatever it is that they do. If someone makes a good salary and puts themselves into sort of the upper economic tiers. On the one hand, if they've done it through their hard work and or through their talents, good for them. But pure merit, there's problems with that as well, which is in a basis. If you were to take an idea of pure meritocracy, then you would have to have everybody starting at the same point, right? The equality of opportunity. But if you wanted to have equality of opportunity, nobody would be able to inherit anything, and nobody would be able to provide advantage to their children. Whether you bust your butt your whole life, or whether you are a crackhead, your kid's going to start at the starting line no matter what. And so that totally eliminates the idea of intergenerational wealth. It eliminates anybody's capacity to like build their families. And so there's some degree of, being able to establish yourself and pass what you've acquired onto your children, to give them a leg up. And I think that's a good thing. But, given enough time, that process entrenches people into upper and lower tiers of society. So, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but you can go too far in either direction. You don't want to have a society where somebody could be an absolute genius, and if they're born into poverty, then they just can't get out of that class and get into a higher class where they probably should be. So it's a sort of thing that a society has to accept some amount of rigidity in its classes, and needs to strive for mobility as well. And adding to that would be, like, if you had a society where 99% of the people have virtually nothing, they're all, and then you've got 1% that has billions of dollars, and it were feasible for a select few people from the masses who are really capable to leap that divide into the upper class, and some people from the highest class who aren't able to cut it wind up tumbling all the way back down amongst the poor masses. You could look at that and say there's a meritocracy going on there to some extent. The cream rises to the crop, but it still would be an extreme example of disparity. And so I think that's damaging. So I think that, like, you're better off with a robust middle class and a more of a smooth transition where people can get in where they fit in and not have this break between like the upper and the lower class. You know what I mean? If it's just like more of a slope, if you will, and people can position themselves along that slope where they're most capable, that's a healthier society, I think. And I think that a strong middle class is value society, because they have cause to strive. They know they can get ahead. They know they can enter the upper class. They know they can become upper middle class. So they have reason to maintain the stability. The middle class is not revolutionary, I think it's having a robust middle class creates a nation of people who are able to reap the benefits of the prosperity of the nation. Their fortunes are tied to the fortunes of the nation. So I guess I support like divisions of class, but I don't support like a real hard division between upper lower, and I don't support pure meritocracy or pure rigid classes.
Very interesting. So, in your opinion, what would be acceptable government policies to help encourage a stronger middle class?
That's a good question. Jobs, having available jobs. I mean, good paying jobs. Poor people are poor because they don't have good paying jobs. A plethora of industry that has workers that are making good wages, competitive wages. Getting rid of some of the expansive welfare state is going to encourage more people to get into, to strive to get into the middle class, because they'll kind of have to do so. I don't know. I mean, I guess my best answer to that would just be a robust economy where employers need workers. That's the best thing. A strong economy, is going to push up wages when more employers are expanding. So if you had protective economic policies and tariffs where these corporations couldn't just ship their factories overseas and then import products back here, or if you go to the store and everything you look at in the electronics or clothing or whatever department of the store you're in, everything has a made in China tag. If you were to try to reverse course on that sort of international trade and bring more manufacturing here, manufacturing jobs tend to be skilled labor, and they tend to be fairly well paying. So if you had expanding factories, if you had less factories closing, then you have upward pressure on wages to get those jobs filled and filled with qualified people, and that's going to push people into the middle class. If somebody's in the top tier of the economic bracket because they own stock in a company, or they're involved in finance, and they're getting their profit from the profit margin of corporations, and those corporations are getting their profit margin by disenfranchising American workers, that's how you create a two-tiered society. You've got the ownership class that makes money on all of the imported goods, and then you've got the lower classes that don't have jobs and are on government handouts. So I think strong industry is the basis for a strong middle class.
Interesting. Yeah. Thank you. Do you think that more could be done at the local level? What I see is a lot of city councils want to look like they're very welcoming of all business, and everyone who wants to open up a factory is welcome to come to their city, and they're going to be given all these preferences and stuff. Do you think local governments should be a little more I don't know, discerning or picky, and be a little bit more critical and demand that they have higher paying jobs and they're going to give back to the community? What are your
I
thoughts on
don't think there's all that much that can be done at the local level. There's certainly some things. The town that I live in, I live in New London, Connecticut, and I don't know if you've heard of. I saw that you'd mentioned something about eminent domain. I don't know if you're familiar with Cato versus New London, but it was an eminent domain case that went to the Supreme Court. There was a large neighborhood that was not a particularly wealthy neighborhood, and the eminent domain, the town basically seized all these people's houses and paid them for whatever somebody decided that their house was worth, but basically forced them off of their properties in order to provide this land to not a public works project, but a corporation, Pfizer, actually, I believe it was, who wanted to set up a facility in town. And so the rationale was, well, we're going to get more tax dollars from Pfizer and their corporate offices here than we get from these rundown houses. So there's the public interest. It helps the coffers of the town. And then they came, and it wound up in the Supreme Court and this and that, and it didn't, pan out, and a lot of that land just sat empty for like 2 decades with nothing there. But Pfizer set up another location elsewhere, I believe, and the town offered them all these tax breaks, and you don't have to pay. It's like, well, where's the benefit then? They in order to kind of persuade corporations, whether it's a headquarters or a factory, we're going to give you these tax breaks, sweetheart deals. We're going to get you guys set in, get you all set up, and as soon as the, like, I don't know, 5-year, 10-year period of tax breaks was up, they closed the facility down, and I think they sold it, or they I don't know, it sat empty for a while. they decided that they didn't want to, they were just there for the tax benefit. Once the tax benefit was over, they left. If you have all these towns all trying to compete to get these corporations to set up their offices or their factories there, nobody's competing to get me to live in town. So I don't get like some special like property tax bonus to get me to move into town. I feel like sometimes it's just these all these people competing to like kiss the rear ends of these corporations. And I feel like the better thing to be done is at the federal level of just getting corporations to set up their headquarters or their factories within the borders of the United States is like step number one. That's the most important thing. And where there's going to be corporations going to want to set up where they've got a good tax deal. They're going to set up in this state or that state based on the tax environment of the state. But it's a balancing act. No town wants to like not have anybody show up to build anything there. But if you're giving away the farm to try to get some corporation to come in and set up, and then they stay there for a little while and then they leave, I don't know if that's really the best approach.
All right. So you mentioned high-paying jobs. What do you think about worker union organization?
I don't really have a problem with workers organizing into unions. I think it's well within their rights to do that. I don't really like I guess I believe in right to work, so I don't know. So I mean, I tend to want to leave the government out of it as much as possible in these kind of situations. So the people want to unionize, they can unionize. If a union and a company set up an arrangement where the company doesn't hire anybody other than the people that are in the union, I mean, that's between two consenting entities. So that doesn't really bother me. I think that there is, at the same time, I mean, there is some degree of penalty on the efficiency, like as if a corporation or if a union negotiates their wages up to a pretty high level, the company is going to be less inclined to want to hire more people because they're paying a lot for these salaries, and so they're going to maybe they're not going to bring on somebody who's inexperienced or is just looking for like an entry level job. They're going to they're not going to hire as many people. They're going to have fewer people with higher salaries rather than more people with lower salaries. And so then the remaining people who didn't get hired, who otherwise would have, then those people are out of luck and they're out of a job. And so then they're on the dole, So there's upsides and downsides to it, certainly. But I guess where I really do have a problem is with public sector unions. That's a whole different ballgame. When like the in a private union, the union representatives and the representatives of the company are sitting across from each other at the table and they're negotiating what the wages are going to be and what the benefits are going to be. But if the governor is sitting across the table from the leaders of the teachers union negotiating what their salaries are going to be, and the teachers union says, well, if you don't give us what we want, we're going to support your primary opponent. We're going to use our political muscle to push you out of your job and replace you with someone who's going to do our bidding. That's kind of a whole different ballgame. Like the union controls who sits on both sides of the table. They're not just on their side of the table negotiating with management. They own management, because of the power of the public sector unions to influence the votes, and then it reflects on their paycheck. So they're paying for, promoting a candidate. They're expending money to promote a candidate, but it's an investment in their own paycheck, So I just find it a little bit dodgy and corrupt. I think that probably public sector unions shouldn't really be allowed, but private sector unions I'm more okay with that.
Okay, interesting. Next two questions you've already touched upon, but I want to give you a chance in case you want to talk more about it. But how wedded are you to capitalism? Um, so you've already talked about how you're a capitalist, but could there possibly be a better way to organize the economy, in your opinion?
No, I don't think so. I think capitalism is pretty on point, but as long as we understand that capitalism serves a function, it's not the objective. We're not in it in order to be capitalists, and we don't say, well, we do this because we're capitalists. We're capitalists because we want to have a strong nation and a strong society. And in the areas where capitalism needs to be questioned or restrained in some way, in order to have a strong society, we need to do that and not be ideological about it, and not say like, well, free markets are always the best option in every circumstance, because that's blind. That's like having blinders on and only like looking at things in terms of that one question. And like especially like I've talked a little bit about international trade, but to people get real stuck on the idea of free markets. So whatever is the existing arrangement of movement of goods across borders is invariably the best, simply because it is free trade, and it's just like it's like ideological. It's just like capitalism is a silver bullet that always works in every circumstance, and that's just not that's simplistic, I think. But
Thank
on
you.
the whole, it is the most efficient way of distributing goods and money and resources among a population. So within one group that shares a system of rules and that shares the objective of prosperity, then that's the best. So an internal domestic market, you want it to be as free as possible, with some constraints to avoid monopolies and other things. But in the international trade, I mean, I'm not interested really in the global economy, the strength of the global economy. I'm interested in the strength of the American economy, and let the rest of the globe work out their own economies.
Right, very good. Thank you. Um, and this one, at the beginning, you were talking about the constraints that are needed on democracy. Do you have any other thoughts on majoritarianism?
Yeah, I saw you had mentioned that you wanted to talk about majoritarianism, and I wasn't entirely sure what the word meant. I looked it up. I guess basically, my thought on that is that, I mean, I guess the first thing that came to mind when I was looking at it is, there's majoritarianism, like political majoritarianism, and then there's cultural majoritarianism. So that whatever the predominant way of living, majority of a population, should be normative. So in that sense, like, I am heteronormative. I think that people, like, just to use this area of discussion, people should, generally speaking, be able to live their lives how they want. If they want to be gays or lesbians or what have you, but that I wouldn't take that to the point where I would say, oh, this is heteronormative or whatever, or Eurocentric or this or that. Um, we should have a heteronormative society because the vast majority of people are heterosexuals. So we should be heteronormative, and this is normal and this is abnormal. And what most people do is normal, and what a sliver of people do is abnormal. And if we're a majority white nation, then it's okay to be Eurocentric because we are the majority, and our culture should be derived from European culture. That's part of being the majority. And it's not appropriate to say that, well, we have to balance, like 80, 90% of 95% of people's interests need to be balanced with 5% or 2% or whatever people's interests. No, not really. Whoever is the majority of the population sets the terms of the culture. So we speak English. And if there's a sliver of people that don't speak English, they should learn to speak English, you know? So I guess from a cultural perspective, while I can appreciate diversity as a premise, culturally, yeah, I'm a majoritarian. If I'm using the word correctly, and then politically, um, I guess that comes back to, like I was talking about, how democracy has to be balanced against, maybe more of an aristocratic sensibility with people who have more at stake in the nation. So, in some sense, there are limits politically to majoritarianism. Like, we don't want to be just pure, unadulterated democracy. Like, you don't want a situation where 51% of the population votes to take everything away from the other 49%, the two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner type of situation. We will need to preserve the rights of the minorities to not be, steamrolled by majority votes. So politically, I think that majoritarian democracy needs to be, restrained in ways, but culturally, not as much. Not as much. Like, there's a big difference between saying, somebody should be able to live their life the way they want without government interference, whether it's, celebrating, like, let's say you're, I don't know, from India, and you're a Hindu and you've got some special holiday that the Hindus celebrate and you want to celebrate it, like, celebrate it. Or, whether it's your sexual preferences or whatever it is, there's a big difference between the government saying, we do things this way, you have to do things this way. And a lot of people, libertarians and others, will just take this idea that you shouldn't be controlled by the government and extrapolate it into, like, nobody should judge anybody else for anything. So it just translates into, well, it's your life and you can live your life how you want. I don't want to speak ill of what anybody else does. Like, I'm not here to judge anybody. I don't want to be that guy who's judging everybody. I don't want to be judgmental. But there's nothing wrong with judging people for what they do. It's not the same as saying you got to go to jail. Like, you don't got to go to jail if you want to be, like, in a poly whatever relationship, three or four people in your little polycule or whatever in your relationship. I don't think it should be illegal, but it should still be within the bounds of appropriateness to be like, yeah, that's strange. I don't really approve, or whether you approve or don't approve, to be able to speak your mind about the way this group or that group behaves. I don't like some religious groups or ethnic groups or whatever, like, oh, you're not allowed to criticize this people or that people for. I think we should be allowed to criticize people. So I guess that's, I don't know where the what was the question?
It was just majoritarianism.
Yeah. I believe in a majoritarian culture. I believe in normativity. Okay. What the majority of people do is accepted as normal.
You bring up an interesting point. So there was I had this conversation. So this was at the beginning of COVID. We didn't really know a lot about stuff, and so our governor, who's a Republican, was encouraging people to wear masks. There were no mask mandates. Yeah, there were a few local governments who did mask mandates, and he said if they feel that they need to, that's fine. But there was no statewide mandate. He was only going to encourage masks. So I had a friend who was also very conservative, and she was saying that type of encouragement coming from a state leader was akin to Nazism. That's what she was going that far to say, and she was serious about this. She was saying that's what the Nazis did. So where would you come down in a situation like that? And
no, I disagree with your friend. Okay. I think that the government, I mean, most hospitals where there's a surgery occurring or something, where there's concern about spreading germs, they wear surgical masks of one sort or another. And, a lot of data has come out that, the masks aren't that effective, or they are, some data says it is, some data says it isn't. in some sense, we don't really know the absolute answer to the question, but I think it's fair to presume, especially when the pandemic first hit, it's fair to presume that, well, people are coughing all over each other and spreading germs, and we generally consider that a face covering is going to prevent the spread of germs, whether it's absolute or not. It's a fair thing to say that people should wear masks. It's another thing to say everybody has to wear a mask. Those are two very different things. And again, that's conflating. I don't think we should conflate the two. I think it's fair and good, even for elected officials. They have voices, and we kind of put them in those positions because we trust their judgment. If we didn't trust their judgment, we wouldn't have put them in that position. So if they say, that they're speaking with health professionals or whoever they're speaking with or wherever they're getting their information from, they think it's a good idea to wear masks. I don't see anything wrong with that sort of thing. And if you want to wear a mask and say, well, the governor says I should wear a mask, so I'm going to wear a mask, go for it. If you don't want to wear a mask because you don't think it's necessary or you think it's oppressive or whatever, then don't wear a mask, But I don't have a problem with like elected officials sharing their opinions about what people should and shouldn't do at all. No.
Okay, thank you. So we are almost out of time. Do you believe that your beliefs are ascendant or descendant? Are they on the rise or decline these days?
Ascendant. I do. I think that the Republican Party is changing, has been changing for the past decade, moving more toward a more nationalist, populist, like old school version of republicanism, kind of like old right that we had before, like say before the end of World War II and the post-war order. That kind of vision of conservatism is replacing what I call paleo-conservatism. It is in the process of replacing neoconservatism as the dominant form of republicanism. So in that sense, I think that's on the rise. I also think that people looking for, like, part of my podcast is about naturalism. And so I talk about like evolutionary psychology and evolution, things like that. I think there's always going to be a religious component of conservatism and of the right. But I think that it is an ascendant movement where people are looking to evolutionary psychology for explanations of how people behave, and the results that they're getting, what they're learning about human nature, reinforces conservatism in a lot of ways and dismantles a lot of the notions of progressivism. So the more that becomes it's kind of a somewhat small segment of conservatism today, but the more that becomes a thing, it's just gonna grow.
All right. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Sure. And I'd like to recommend everybody go and subscribe. I'll put the YouTube link in the description.
Okay.
And do you have anything else you want to plug at this time? Got 1 more minute.
No, I don't think so. Go check out the podcast. I got another one I just posted today to the podcast, so it's available on like Spotify and podcast type of avenues, Apple, and then it's also available on YouTube. So I got a new episode going up today. So yeah, check it out. There's all different types of stuff in there, and hopefully you find something you like.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks for this interview, man. It was great fun.